When I made my video making Roy viable, I had no clue it would be so popular. I really was surprised at the sheer number of people who wanted me to balance more characters, and I really was interested in a lot of the discussion that came up as a result of the video. So in this video, I will be taking the challenge of making arguably the worst character in the game viable for competitive play. But before I do that, I want to discuss my balance philosophy. Some people seemed a little put off that I didn't buff viable Roy to be as good as Fox. People brought up Project M, a fairly well-balanced mod of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, in which every character in the cast is designed to be roughly as good as Melee Fox. Fox is the best character in Melee because he has so many different good tools that he can use in so many different situations. The options he has access to at almost all times are so good that they greatly minimize his downsides. Fox does have exploitable weaknesses, such as being very easily comboed, but because his strengths are so bountiful and so good, these weaknesses don't hurt him all too much. Unlike worse characters, his downsides don't make him terrible. So yeah, viable Roy isn't as good as Melee Fox, but he's not supposed to be. I believe that when a character is balanced, they should be designed to be about as good as a mid-tier character. This means that if I were to balance Melee, I would try to make everybody about as good as Melee Mario. To go back to Project M, I don't really like its balance philosophy. They tried to make everybody as good as Melee Fox. Everyone's tools are too abundant and too good, and to make a diverse cast of characters that good, they gave a majority of the roster obnoxious gimmicks. The tools they were given are so good that most characters can kill off of just one combo starter. I don't believe that giving characters a lot of weird overpowered tools just so they can compete is good game design. I don't think a game where every character has a death touch is a well-designed one. SD Remix, a Melee balance patch, is the same way, not touching top tiers but buffing everyone else so they can compete. The same thing happened. Too many characters were given a lot of overpowered, weird, unnecessary stuff to be able to compete, which made the mod, in my opinion, not fun to play. I want to make everybody about as good as Melee Mario, because then every character will have the tools to compete, but unlike Melee Fox, they'll still have their polarizing downsides. With that aside, let's make Kirby viable for competitive play. Kirby is arguably the worst character in the game, ranked 26th out of 26 on the current Melee tier list. However, this doesn't mean he doesn't have strengths. For example, he actually has pretty good kill power. Unfortunately, his strengths are overshadowed by a truly polarizing weakness, his terrible mobility. His mobility is so bad that despite having 5 mid-air jumps, he still has one of the worst recoveries in the game. He can't run away, he can't follow up, he can't really do much of anything. So let's buff his mobility. Viable Kirby's ground speed will be upped a little bit, and his air mobility will be buffed to be just a little bit slower than Jigglypuff's. This fixes his abysmal recovery and follow-ups. Next, let's buff some of his moves. Though you might not believe it, most of Kirby's moves are actually decent. His tilts and aerials are, for the most part, pretty good, and now that he has better mobility, he'll be able to make a lot better use out of his kit. But I want to make a few tweaks anyway. First of all, his neutral air is pretty bad. I'm not going to buff it that much, since making every move on a character good is terrible design, but it wouldn't hurt to at least make it not useless. The obvious answer would be to give it more knockback, but I think we can do better than that. Since the knockback is so terrible, viable Kirby's neutral air will have a little bit more, but the main difference will be that it will have less landing lag. That means that instead of it being a combo tool or something to knock the opponent away, it'll let Kirby pressure his opponent's shield. Kirby already has powerful aerials, so it makes more sense to make his Nair a completely different tool entirely with its own applications. Next, let's buff his forward air. It's already pretty good, but to make the multi-hit thing work a little better, viable Kirby's will be a little bit faster. Now let's look at his throws. Forward throw and back throw kinda suck. Kirby can suicide kill the opponent, but the throws are very easy to break out of. I'm not removing Kirby's side because I feel like it's an important part of what makes him unique, but I also won't make his forward and back throws inescapable because that would be both unfair and not fun to play against. Instead, his forward and back throws will be just a little bit harder to break out of, so maybe they'll kill sometimes. So it turns out Kirby didn't really need too many changes to become viable. Most of the tools he needed were already there, he just didn't have the mobility he needed to effectively use them. And of course, it doesn't hurt that some of his existing options were buffed a little bit. So now it's time to show off viable Kirby, but before I do that, I want to thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, please leave it a like and a comment. If you like this series, please be sure to subscribe because I have a lot more of this coming up. Until then, this is MagicScrumpy, and this is Viable Kirby.